Steel containers crash onto rail cars in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Pallets of lithium cells stack in silence across Sonora. The trucks don't stop at U.S. Customs. They never even cross the border. Canada and Mexico, once considered junior partners in America's North American vision, are now deep into constructing a $120 billion trade corridor that cuts cleanly around the United States. This isn't protest. It's precision. The spark? A letter signed in bold black ink by President Donald Trump announcing tariffs, 35% on Canadian goods and 30% on Mexican imports, framed as essential to American security. The consequences, however, weren't just economic. They were structural. And now the shift is accelerating. Canada's Mark Carney didn't retaliate with threats. Instead, he sat down with Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's newly elected president. Together, they agreed to move beyond trilateral dependence and toward bilateral sovereignty. Their response wasn't a treaty, it was action, a rail network, a blockchain-enabled customs platform, and a cross-border logistics chain that entirely sidesteps Washington. This new system, known as the Northern Intercontinental Supply Link, reroutes high-value trade through three key mechanisms. A direct rail line from Monterrey to British Columbia. A bilateral customs integration system using encrypted declarations. Port-to-port shipping along Pacific and Gulf routes. Every shipment bypasses U.S. inspection, taxation, and authority. In 2024, North America saw $756 billion in goods cross the U.S. border. Of that, $138 billion was what's known as hub trade, cargo merely transiting the U.S. en route elsewhere. This new corridor directly targets that flow. The goal? Divert $69 billion by 2026. Detroit, once the powerhouse of North American auto manufacturing, is at risk of flatlining. Under the old model, battery modules from Mexico and nickel from Canada would pass through U.S. territory for final assembly. Under the new system, they bypass Indiana and Michigan entirely, linking directly in Ontario and Baja. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, every 10,000 electric vehicles produced supports roughly 3,000 indirect jobs. With Canada and Mexico now planning to produce 360,000 EVs annually via this corridor, the potential job displacement in the U.S. reaches 108,000. Not outsourced overseas, just redirected across what was once an open border. Carney has already secured $2.3 billion for infrastructure upgrades at Prince Rupert Port. Mexico followed with 27 billion pesos for expanding roads and terminals in the Sonora-Durango corridor. These aren't temporary measures. They're sunk-cost commitments signaling that this corridor is here to stay. Let's stop pretending this is just about tariffs. This is about relevance, and the U.S. is being written out of its own playbook. America authored NAFTA. Now it's being left out of the sequel. And this rewrite isn't driven by resentment. It's driven by efficiency. The contradictions are mounting. Trump imposed 50% steel tariffs to block Chinese imports. But now, that same steel is redirected through Canada, processed, and shipped to Mexico. The U.S. firewall is forcing global trade to route around it. At a press briefing, Sheinbaum put it bluntly, "We are no longer looking for permission. We are designing systems that cannot be vetoed." Carney echoed the sentiment, inviting Mexico to collaborate directly. No need for G7 approval. This, they argue, isn't confrontation. It's design. Encrypted customs declarations between Canada and Mexico now allow cargo to move without U.S. oversight or clearance. This is the first major trade corridor to digitally detach from U.S. customs and border protection. It's not an alliance, it's a protocol. And this corridor offers something the U.S. currently cannot: green supply chain certification. Both nations are integrating renewable energy, wind and solar, into their logistics infrastructure. European regulators have already labeled the corridor climate compliant, exempting its goods from Brussels' carbon border tax. U.S.-routed goods, by contrast, are penalized. Every kilometer rerouted diverts revenue from American roads. Arizona and Texas alone are projected to lose $4 billion annually in toll revenue. Buffalo, once a major transshipment hub, is facing a 27% decline in east-west cargo volume, according to the Great Lakes Freight Authority. And the backlash isn't just economic, it's personal. Border towns like Sault Ste. Marie and Blaine are seeing fewer Canadian visitors. In June alone, car crossings dropped by 33%, the sixth consecutive month of decline. Not due to protest, but simply fatigue. For families who've owned cabins in Vermont for generations, the decision is painful. But yes, many are selling, not out of anger, but out of a deeper feeling that the border is no longer a bridge. It's become a checkpoint. In Maine, Quebecer Harold White canceled his annual vacation for the first time in 62 years. He told CBC, "I didn't feel insulted. I felt erased. This isn't diplomacy anymore. It's dignity." Meanwhile, Mark Carney isn't waiting for apologies from Washington. He's busy signing long-term deals with Hydro-Quebec, Indigenous equity partners, and clean energy companies to strengthen Canada's export infrastructure. He's not trying to punish the United States, he's aiming to surpass it. The new Canada-Mexico trade corridor has brought per-ton shipping costs down to $68, while the U.S. route still averages $102. Even if Trump were to lift the tariffs tomorrow, the underlying logistics wouldn't shift back. The bypass isn't political theater, it's economic reality. Export Development Canada's financial commitments extend through 2028. Banks' pledges reach even further. These projects aren't reactions, they're blueprints. And the more they take root, the more the United States starts looking like a third wheel in what was once a North American triangle. At the G7 summit, Carney told Sheinbaum, "We'll build without drama." The irony? The drama began in the Oval Office. Now it's reshaping the economic map, one where the United States is no longer on the legend. Here's the sharpest twist. This corridor is projected to cost the United States more than it gained from NAFTA in its first 4 years. Estimated 5-year loss, $245 billion. NAFTA's gain from 1994 to 1998, $221 billion. California's grid operator recently issued a quiet report. Electricity prices are expected to rise by $3.1 billion annually due to Canada redirecting LNG to Mexico. The Manzano pipeline now bypasses California altogether. Trump's wall, it seems, just hit the power grid. The White House now finds itself cornered. Roll back the tariffs and appear weak, or keep them in place and cement the corridor's dominance. But the truth is, the logistics industry has already moved on. Supply chain leaders now call it a risk-free lane. Orders are shifting. Warehouses in Ohio are losing contracts to new logistics hubs in Mazatlan and British Columbia. And even if the political climate softens, the business contracts won't rewind. U.S. allies like Japan and Germany are already exploring the corridor as a North American gateway without U.S. involvement. That's not a trade victory. That's a sovereignty retreat. The U.S. hoped tariffs would reassert control. Instead, they triggered decentralization. And now, the two countries once seen as secondary players in the continental equation, Canada and Mexico, are leading the charge. So what is this? A rebellion? A correction? Or a realization that the dependency was never truly mutual? The Carney-Sheinbaum alliance doesn't need Washington's blessing. It only needed its provocation. From clean energy routes to lithium supply chains to digitized customs systems, the corridor is no longer just a plan. It's a fully formed parallel system. And Washington's strongest trade weapon, market access, is losing value by the hour. So what happens next? Even if the tariffs are reversed, a new standard has already been set: regional trade autonomy without U.S. mediation. The USMCA isn't dead, it's simply been outpaced. And here's the final irony. The signature Trump intended to project strength ended up authorizing the very split he meant to prevent. That letter wasn't leverage, it was liberation. The corridor officially launches this September. Early shipments are already being prepared. By 2026, the plan is to absorb $120 billion in diverted trade annually. Not hypothetical, not aspirational, operational. So when historians ask how the United States lost control of the North American supply grid, the answer won't be war. It won't be betrayal. It'll be one word: overreach. The continent isn't being redrawn with borders. It's being redrawn with data, shipping containers, and perhaps most profoundly, silence. This is how empires aren't toppled, but outmaneuvered. And if the United States hopes to return to the center, it may find that no center remains. Because Canada and Mexico didn't walk away. They built a door.